Hi, everyone.
Shenandoah Detention
I'm Mia
Center.
Sussman.
Yeah.
I am the Director of Fellowship City Full Justice Works, and I am the co-chair of the membership committee of the Washington Council of Lawyers. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. This is an excellent turnout. My job is to encourage you to join the Washington Council of Lawyers. So as you hopefully know from these handy little pamphlets out front, the Washington Council of Lawyers is a voluntary bar association here in DC to promote pro bono and public interest. We've got folks from all across the legal spectrum, government lawyers, law students, public interest folks, and we have a variety of programming from volunteering in the community to mentoring young people who are going into public interest careers, put on a ton of great programming. So membership costs just $25 a year to join as a law student or a government lawyer, $40 a year for a nonprofit lawyer. And as a member, you have access to a bunch of our events for free, including tonight's event and others throughout the summer, actually throughout the year. You also get access to the Public Interest Jobs Clearinghouse, which is a resource that comes out monthly that has all kinds of jobs in the public interest field, so that's great. And you have access to a network of like-minded folks, so really encourage you to join. We have a couple of events coming up, and I actually don't have the little sheet in front of me. I know we have a happy hour at Blackfin coming up, and we also have a panel with Judge Eric Washington in DC here. So there's more information with the specifics out on the table. Sorry that I don't have that at my fingertips. But again, really excited that you're all here tonight. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sterling Morris. I'm going to turn it over to our first guest speaker, who's maybe Sterling can introduce you to.
I can.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Delisa Morris, and I'm actually the PSJD Fellow at the National Association for Law Placement, which is NALP. Right now, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about PSJD and how you can use PSJD to find the fellowship of your dreams and other job opportunities. Okay, so really quickly, by a show of hands, how many of you guys use PSJD, have heard of PSJD, or even know anything about it? Okay. All right, very good. Again, if you guys aren't using PSJD right now, I really encourage you to start using the site ASAP. It has public interest internships, fellowships, pro bono opportunities, and an array of jobs across the country for attorneys and people who hold JDs. And it's likely that it'll be a free resource to you if your law school is a member, which it most likely is, because we do have most law schools as members of PSJD. And there are many different types of fellowships, and PSJD is an expert resource to help you potential fellows navigate that fellowship application process, which you'll hear more about later, I'm sure. And so in this short presentation, what I'm going to do is show you how to use the PSJD resources effectively and how to search for fellowships on PSJD, as well as create fellowship alerts to get those right to your inbox, okay? Okay, so here's the psjd.org homepage. When you come to the site, you'll see this. And today we're just going to focus on the search function and the resource center, what's highlighted right here. So right here is the PSJD Resource Center. Again, on your own time, I suggest that you definitely go have a quick look. That is not the Resource Center. There we go. Go have a quick look at what PSJD resources have to offer you. And again, we have an entire section dedicated to just postgraduate fellowships. So when you click on this postgraduate fellowships box in the PSJD Resource Center, what you're going to see is several resources all dedicated to fellowships. There are application and interview tip sheets, a fellowship comparison chart, the comprehensive fellowship guide, and one of our most popular resources, which is the fellowship deadline calendar. Okay, so this is the fellowship's deadline calendar, and on PSJD, no fellowships expire. We do that for research purposes. We want you guys to be able to prepare your applications to the best of your ability. If you already know what they're looking for a year in advance, that's a better way to tailor your application, right? And And so you can see how often an employer posts a fellowship, position. So if that's annually, biannually, I don't think any are 3 years, but there's a possibility. And the calendar views are also adjustable, and the calendar itself is searchable. I cannot tell you guys how useful this resource is for people who are planning to become fellows. So definitely check it out. Okay, so now let's move on to the PSJD search tools. This is the most used side of the database because the PSJD search tools allows you to look at every job that we have on the PSJD database and all of the employers who post positions with us. And I'm going to quickly show you how to do a fellowship search and set up an alert. So when you click on the homepage search box, you'll be led to this simple screen. And I'm going to actually walk down so I can do the search on the computer. But I don't think these mics are going to reach. So.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
Please.
Just let me log in really quick. Okay, so again, here's the search page. You have an option to do a regular search or an advanced search. If you do the advanced search, you have to click an employer to search through employer profiles or through the job postings themselves. What we're going to start out with is just a simple search. We're going to search fellowships or just fellowship without a location. As you can see, we have 1,230 fellowship job postings, and those are currently active in the database, as well as 145 employer profiles that have posted fellowships with us recently. Okay, so here is our search results. We have fellowship positions from all across the United States, and I like this search result. I'm open to where I want to go geographically, and I can have it notify me. I'm going to name this alert title Fellowships 101. And I want them to send me fellowships daily. I'm really interested. And you just hit save. And so they will send you emails from the database tied to the email address that you log in with. Again, if you just want to save the search so that it's easy for you to run every time you log in, you can click Save Search. Again, I'm going to name it Fellowships 101, and then I won't have to click anything when I log in. Another great thing about the PSJD search tool is that we can narrow our search results. Say, for instance, if I just want to see project-based fellowships, I am a Skadden Fellow and I'm looking for a partner, or I'm interested in becoming a Skadden Fellow. And so you can just, or an EJW Fellow, and you can click project-based and do the search. It's going to say changes will be made, fine. And so now we can just see all of the ones that are partnership-based fellowships. Again, you can narrow it by internally funded positions or clinical academic positions as well. And of course, you can narrow it by geographic location that you're interested in. All of these combinations you can use, you can save them. Say, for instance, if you're looking for project-based fellowships in Washington, D.C., but you are also looking for organizational funded fellowships in Chicago. You can make those two different searches and run them automatically. So while I'm over here, before I go to the end of my slides, does anybody have a quick search they want me to do? Okay, yeah, sure. Orlando, like Florida, right? Okay, so let's search Florida instead of specifically searching Orlando. So there is a fellowship in Orlando available, but there are also some all over Florida too. And are there any questions about anything I just showed you guys? There's a lot more to the PSJD database, so I definitely suggest that you guys take a look at it so you can see the different resources and opportunities that you can find on PSJD. But is there anything I can answer for you you guys right now. I tried to keep it short and sweet. Yes, Sterling.
I was wondering if you could differentiate between the fellowship listings that are on PSJD and versus actually applying to a fellowship.
Okay, yes. So fellowship listings that are posted on PSJD are just guidelines. So partners, all right, so how do you want me to explain this? Because I thought there's a big difference between the different types of fellowships that there are. So at Equal Justice Works in Skadden, there's kind of like a duo application process. You're applying to become an Equal Justice Works or a Skadden Fellow, but then you're also applying to what they call a host organization to work with them. And so you have to do both application processes, and they're set at different times. Say, for instance, if you already kind of like a host organization, if you've reached out to them first and you're still before the deadline of EJW or Skadden, the host organization will work with you to create a project so that when you apply to be an EJW or a Skadden Fellow, you can already have your application materials set and ready to go and already have that host organization. Is that something like you were looking for the explanation?
Yeah, just to clarify, so like when you apply to a project-based fellowship like Equal Justice Works or Skadden, you're going to need a host. You need an organization that has agreed to employ you if you get the fellowship, which we'll go into a lot more detail. PSJD is a great place to find organizations that are actively looking to put in an application with a potential applicant. So those listings that showed up are all organizations that are saying, we want to apply. Please contact us, and sometimes they have even a mini application to become the person that they will then partner with in an application to Equal Justice Works or Skadden. So it's not, you're not necessarily applying to a job, right? But we're applying directly to a fellowship program, and that's why when you do that project-based fellowship distinction, that's a good, you know that it's kind of like a pre-application, right? So and we can talk to our panelists about how they found their organizations. Some find them through PSJD listings, some through existing relationships.
And also, in addition to project-based fellowships on PSJD, there are clinical academic ones and ones that are internally funded, which is kind of like what my fellowship is right now. So that is where the actual organization both pays you and hosts you, internally funded fellowship. Clinical academic fellowships can be tied to LLM programs at times, but most of the time they're working in the law school clinic, and those can be fellowships as well. Okay? Yes?
All right. So I understood the distinction that you guys are trying to make, but when I click on a specific posting, how is that distinction highlighted, whether or not it's a post or it's
Sure, let's look at one. Okay, so here we go. This one says, of course, it logs me out. Okay, so this one is labeled Legal Fellow Sponsorship, and it's with the New York Civil Liberties Union, and we code them at PSJD according to if they're project-based or internally funded or clinical academic. So we try to get it right all the time, but all the time we don't get it right. Some common clues to look for is if it's a project-based fellowship, they will talk about having the third-party sponsor, okay? So that's somebody that you're working with, but someone else is paying you. And if it's clinical academic, of course it'll be for a school, usually, or some type of justice center or some type of center that's housed inside of an institution, a school institution. And if it's internally funded, if it doesn't have those other things, that's kind of the catch-all at the bottom, right? Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I see it. So it's pretty much look at the job type, and you guys distinguish which one it is.
Yeah. Any other questions real quick? Thank you guys so much for listening to my spiel. I hope you guys okay, so now, how many people are going to use PSJD when we leave? Everybody? Looking good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Lisa. I'm now taking on my moderator hat, or putting on my moderator hat. My name is Sterling Morris. I'm a senior manager of fellowships at Equal Justice Works, and I am really happy to be with you today. I have participated on this panel for I think 4 years now, and I got graduated to moderating it, so I'm really excited to pass the torch to my esteemed colleagues to my left to give you all the great information that they have for you today. So you can see it in the program. You can read about the bios of everyone here. I'm not going to get into that. I want to get straight into the substance, but to give you a little bit of context, so my colleagues, the first three, the farthest away from me, are here to talk about project-based fellowships like Skadden and Equal Justice Works. So we have, on the end, we have Cory, who is a current Skadden Fellow at Whitman-Walker here in DC. We have Adina Appelbaum next to him, who is a current Equal Justice Works Fellow at CAIR Coalition here in DC. And then we have representing the host organization, the organization where the fellows are employed, side, we have Matt Hendley, excuse me, who is at the Washington Lawyers Committee. So we're going to spend a majority of time speaking about this for the next 30-ish minutes. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Malik here, who's going to talk about government fellowships. He's with the Partnership for Public Service. Just to give you a little framework of what it's going to look like, and then we'll leave a little time at the end for questions. So just to jump right into it, to start, I would love for Connor and then Adina to just give us a very brief description of what your project is that you've designed, and have you had any big wins to date?
I will go ahead and start. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So I am a Skadden Fellow at Whitman-Walker Health here in DC. Whitman-Walker is a medical legal partnership. So we primarily serve the LGBT communities as well as HIV positive individuals in a whole kind of wide variety of legal matters. But my specific project is focusing on providing direct legal services to young immigrants who identify as LGBTQ. So most of my work is directly representing immigrants in immigration proceedings or applying affirmatively for immigration benefits. But I also do related issues that affect people's lives. So I'll do some discrimination cases, name and gender change matters for trans clients, and that's for the most part sort of the extent of my work. In terms of big wins, thankfully in Washington D.C. Unfortunately, I feel like with immigration, it's a very slow, and Adina will speak more eloquently to this, but immigration's tough right now for a lot of different reasons, and things are moving really slowly. But I will say in the discrimination field, at least locally, DC has got really good laws specifically for the LGBT community, definitely for the trans community and for immigrant communities. So we've had a number of really good wins in discrimination claims when people have been discriminated against, either on the basis of their immigration status or on the basis of their gender identity.
Awesome. Great. So my name's Adina, and I am doing the Equal Justice Works Fellowship. I'm almost done with my second year now. And my project at CAIR Coalition is on the intersection of criminal and immigration law. And I started an impact litigation project at CAIR Coalition, which traditionally has been much more of a kind of emergency room for detained immigrants getting deported. But through the project in the past 2 years, we've been able to step back a little bit and do some more intentional litigation, basically challenging what state criminal offenses get categorized as a reason for someone to get deported. So that often means having to go up on appeal. So we have a lot of long-term cases, the Board of Immigration Appeals, the Fourth Circuit. They do take a long time, but we have seen some really great wins in the past few years that has been really exciting. It's one of those things like once we're at the Fourth Circuit, a lot of the times we can win just sort of getting a fair court. And we've also seen more incremental wins in the lower courts. So, for example, immigration judges are now applying the legal analysis a little bit more than they were before, thinking about burdens of proof and things like that. And yeah, getting pro bono teams to work on this area. So we've worked with a lot of law firms in DC to bring these impact cases, and now have 5 firms working in this area, whereas before we couldn't get any firms to take these cases. So that's been probably the biggest win.
That's awesome. So for both of you, and then I also want Matt to jump in on this next question, if you could explain a little bit about the impetus behind the idea of your project, how you actually came up with this idea, how it was formed, at what point did you work with your now host organization, how did this whole process work up until the point where you actually applied? So I don't know if Connor wants to start first, maybe, having done it more recently?
Yeah, sure. I am pretty fresh to the scene, so I'm happy to also talk with folks afterwards. I just graduated in 2016, so this is all pretty recent for me. So I actually was thinking about this a little bit before, kind of, there's different ways to approach how you might want to come up with a project. For me, it was very much based on the community I wanted to work with. I also think you could approach it from, like, I had some colleagues in my class who really had an organization that they wanted to work with. So somebody who said, I really know I want to work with the ACLU. I'm a little bit, I'm pretty open and flexible about what the subject matter might be, but this is the organization I want to be at. And so they really targeted that and made their flexibility known to the organization. For me, it was more community, like I knew I wanted to work with the LGBTQ community, and I was more flexible about what the subject matter might look like. I had a sense, that I was interested in immigration law, but I basically approached Whitman-Walker. So because I knew I wanted to work with the LGBT community, when I was in law school, I was looking for, what are the premier organizations that are serving this community, and I knew I wanted to do direct representation, and so Whitman-Walker in DC is that organization, and so I tried to my best to really make connections and make relationships with people at the organization, and then let them know pretty early on, if and when you're looking for a fellow, I'd like to apply, and I'm pretty open in terms of the kinds of stuff I'm interested in, but I'm interested primarily in discrimination and immigration, so for me, I didn't end up really going through kind of the application process internally with the organization. It was more sort of like a lot of conversations around, well, does this make sense for both parties? And I'm happy to also talk a little bit later on about kind of my own self-assessment, being really honest with myself about if Whitman-Walker approached me and they would say, we do have a really strong need within the immigration community, sort of checking in with myself and thinking, is this really what I want, how I want to start my career? And adapting to an organization, but not necessarily tying myself to it if it wasn't the right fit. But it ended up being a good fit.
I have a pretty similar story in the sense that I had somewhat of an idea of what I wanted to do when I was in law school. I knew I wanted to be an immigration lawyer. I learned pretty quickly I love doing detained work. And CAIR Coalition was the only detained legal service provider in DC, so that was a clear fit. I also knew that one of the only ways I could get a paid job after law school was through a fellowship. So I was thinking about it really early on. I had no idea how to go about it, but I heard that it was helpful to intern at the place where you wanted to be your host organization. So I did that during my 2L summer. I interned at CAIR Coalition, and I was really lucky, and I actually got to do this kind of split summer where I interned there and also at the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. They have an immigration program there. And it was a lot of the same clients. So I would see the same people in the criminal system and the immigration system. And I just tried to really think the whole summer about what those gaps were and what could be done more creatively, and what were some interventions that could be done in these two systems that we're combining. So I waited toward the end of the summer to pitch it to CAIR Coalition, and I spent most of the summer just really thinking and writing. I mean, I didn't write the proposal, but I wrote out a lot of ideas and waited to make that pitch until I felt like I had a clear idea of something, and that opened a conversation.
And Connor, at what point did you get to the kind of full idea phase?
I was not there. I think I was probably pretty late in the scheme of things. I'd started creating the relationship with Whitman-Walker really early on, and that worked to my benefit. But I didn't start actually coming full circle with an actual idea until, maybe August of my 2L summer, if that.
And that was working like with Whitman?
Yeah, working with Whitman-Walker. August is probably pretty early. It was probably more like September, about a month before the application was due.
Sounds great. So Matt, tell us what this looks like from the other side for an organization that, by the way, congratulations, has had a lot of recent wins in terms of getting a good number of project-based fellowships. They have a current 2016 Equal Justice Works Fellow, and then this fall there will be both a new Skadden Fellow and a new Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Washington Lawyers Committee. So very exciting. Yeah, what does this look like? Do you usually post on PSJD? Do you talk to your interns about it? What does it look like?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And yeah, we're very fortunate that as of this time, in just a few months, we actually will have 3 fellows in our relatively small organization at one time, 2 AJW and a Skadden Fellow. So there are elements to our process that are very similar to what Connor and Adina said, but some differences too. Just by way of explanation, so the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights is a nonprofit civil rights law firm that has a fairly broad list of project areas that we work in. They're all civil rights areas, but we have a dedicated housing discrimination project, an employment discrimination project, disability rights, immigrant rights, prisoners' rights, and education, and also a growing criminal justice reform project too. And so ideally, we would love to be able to have as many as 2 new fellows a year. But what we typically are trying to do is we don't really know ahead of time which one of those areas is going to really grab us with a project idea. Of the 3 fellows that we'll have here in just a few months, our existing EJW fellow is in our housing project focused on trying to use the civil rights laws to address the affordable housing crisis in the DC area. The other EJW fellow who's coming in the fall is going to be focused on doing debtors prison and excessive fines and fees issues, which is an area that we actually aren't doing all that much work in right now, but are wanting to really expand our work into. And our Skadden Fellow is going to be doing collateral consequences of incarceration issues related to employment and housing and the disparate impact that those have on race. So in other words, how the criminal justice system, its impact that it has on race and its ability for people to find jobs and housing. So all those areas were ones that, even though we had some, I would say that some knowledge or inkling that we might want to be doing some work in that area, it was really the conversation begun by the applicant that really got us very interested in it. And so our process is this, in that we ask that anybody who's interested in applying for a fellowship provide us a short letter by mid-July that describes what, in general terms, they would really like to try to focus their 2-year fellowship on, and then in addition providing us a resume and transcript. But in advance of that, I would encourage people to have discussions with us, to contact me, and even if I'm not the right person, I would be able to focus you to the person who's in the relevant project area to kind of help at least focus you on what it is that maybe you would be interested in that might fit well within our needs. For this upcoming fellowship application cycle, we don't have any, we're not beholden to any sort of type of fellowship right now. We're really just looking for intriguing and new ideas and that we might be able to work with. And so we get those in the middle of the summer, We've probably helped discuss at least a good handful, if not maybe half of them already, with people who are wanting to apply. We go through them and then try to, by the beginning of August, sort of cull it down to a select few that we then have interviews with. And then once we've decided who we would like to match with on that, and they've decided that they would like to move forward with us, we then work with the applicant to create their fellowship application for EJW and for Skadden. And we're also open to thinking about other fellowships that may be out there too, that may be good matches for us. So trying to work to create as good of a package as possible to submit in the September, October range. And we've been very fortunate that we've had very good luck in recent years. And I think our most recent EJW fellow, who's finished up her fellowship just in the last 12 months, capped it off in a very outstanding way. We had an EJW fellow who was focused on pregnancy discrimination and caregiver discrimination, and during the first month of her fellowship, we launched a case against a pregnancy discrimination case against Chipotle who had wrongfully terminated a minimum wage food line worker because she needed to go to her prenatal appointment. The month before her fellowship ended, that case finally went to trial, and she was taking the lead, and that she did the lead opening arguments and the direct examination of our client, and returned a $550,000 verdict, which we think is actually the largest Pregnancy Discrimination Act case verdict that's ever been had. So she was quite pleased. We were quite pleased. Our client was even more pleased. I can't speak highly enough of the fellowship, of the fellows that we've had, and we wouldn't actually even really be able to do what we do without them.
Thank you. Yeah, Christine, who was there, was really definitely a rock star.
Right.
And Matt, it sounds like for any 2Ls in the room that they have 1 month to figure out an idea and pitch you. That's what I heard.
Ideally, yeah, we would love to, and
Or
to
3
start
weeks,
reaching
I
out. Yeah, that's right. We want, it's an artificial deadline of our own, but it's
Sure.
something that we would like to try to, so we have enough time to get the best application possible.
Awesome. So why don't we spend a couple of minutes talking about what the applications actually look like for these programs. So Connor or Adina, I don't know if you want to take the lead, kind of what are the main sections? How is it broken out? Obviously, we're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details. All of you can go to the individual fellowship websites to see what they look like. But just in broad strokes, kind of what sort of details are they asking for when you're creating a new proposal like this?
Okay, so Skadden Fellowship application, I think my understanding is that it's actually a little earlier this year than in years past. So typically, there's sort of 2 or 3 main chunks to the application, maybe more. But the part that you would want to be focusing on the earlier end, once you've managed to select an organization and really kind of hammer out what you want your project to look like, actually, I'm going to add in a little component before step 1. I would suggest calling the director of the fellowship, whose name is Susan Butler-Plum. She's sort of administers the fellowship, and her phone number is readily accessible. It's on the Skadden website. And what you should do is just call her and pitch your project. And that can even be at a kind of an earlier stage once you've just selected your organization and have a rough sense. You want to be well prepared with the phone call and have some questions prepared. But she remembers people, and she'll provide you with some insight in it. My call, just to be frank with you all, it was rough. I called and she was like, "Ugh, that sounds terrible." So she gave me some constructive feedback, and I was a little discouraged. But in the end, it ended up being really helpful feedback that if I hadn't called her, I'm not sure I would have made the tweaks to my application that I needed to make. So that's sort of the precursor to preparing your written application. I think the written application this year is due September 18th. It's I think So the Office of Public Interest mentors here at Georgetown once referred to it as like a haiku application. It's a very short application as compared to the EJW application. So it's actually really helpful to be preparing your EJW application if you're going to apply for both, and then sort of distill down to your Skadden application. The problem being, I guess, that Skadden is due earlier, if I'm not mistaken. But so the Skadden application is three questions, basically, three kind of broad stroke questions. The first one is, what's your project and what are the legal rights that you're going to be focusing on? The second one is about your past, and so what have you done what public interest projects have you done in your past? And I think you're limited to, I want to say like 300 words. It's a small word limit, so you've got to be really intentional with every word you're using. And then the last one is this broad stroke question of what's the relevance of public interest work today kind of question. And you want to make sure you're fitting in, obviously, aspects of yourself and what you bring to this work and what makes you the candidate to be bringing this project into fruition. So once they process those written applications, and I'll just say Skadden is very transparent about these steps. They happen on very concrete dates. So these dates are already set out. You'll know exactly when you're going to hear about the next step. They select 100 people based on those written applications for an interview. And then you go in for an interview. It's usually like mid to late October. I suspect more towards mid-October this year. And it'll be an interview with Susan, who I mentioned earlier, and then a partner from the firm. Based on that interview, then they select, I think, 56 semifinalists. And then your role is done. You've done what you can do, and you just sit back and wait until November 17th this year, that they'll make a phone call out after they have like a board of trustees meeting and sort of discuss of those 56 which 25 or 30 candidates they want to select for fellowships.
Awesome. So before you go, Adina, I thought it might be helpful to give a little programmatic information about Equal Justice Works to differentiate the application process, and then I can have Adina talk about like what the application looks like. So our application at Equal Justice Works opens next week, next Wednesday, and then it closes September 27th. So it is indeed a 10 days or so after the Skadden Fellowship closes. It is a longer application, as you'll hear from Adina. And then after you've applied, our process doesn't have the benefit of being quite as transparent as the Skadden process because of the way that we are funded. So the Skadden Fellowship process, or the Skadden Fellowship, is funded by the Skadden Fellowship Foundation. So every year they use there's a central person, a central entity, the Board of Trustees of the foundation, deciding all 25 to 28, however many they decide to fund that year, fellows. So they're going to take their whole broad list of applications and they're going to cull that down into one class. At Equal Justice Works, every single fellow that is funded by a different sponsor. So they're going to have a different law firm, a different company, a different bar foundation, maybe it's a family foundation or an anonymous funder that is going to come to Equal Justice Works, commit to funding, and then they're actually going to give us parameters on the type of project they want to fund. And that means that every fellow that we fund that is selected is actually a separate selection process. So in 2017, this fall, we have 77 fellows that are going to be launched into the field, it's our largest class ever. We're really, really proud of that fact. That means that we at Equal Justice Works and our staff did 77 separate interview processes. So it's a very different process, and as a result, it means that candidates can stay in our pool for longer. Because it kind of happens on a rolling basis, and because some sponsors, just by virtue of when they committed, are going to interview earlier, maybe in December, and then others will commit later in the process, and they're gonna interview later in March. And so as a result, there can be situations where you don't even receive an interview until late in the cycle, until the spring. But that doesn't mean that your project is any less worthy or was scored any less. In our metric, it's just a pure numbers game based off of the preferences of who is funding individual fellowships. So Adina, I'd love to hear if you want to talk a little bit about like what what it is that you have to create to make one of these applications.
Sure, and please feel free to jump in because
Sure.
it's been 2 years.
Of course.
So I'll try to remember the most important parts I can. It is a long application. It's nice that it opens early so you can look at the questions and take time to work on the responses and work on it with your host organization. I'm not going to remember every question, but I remember some of the most important parts. So it starts off with a short essay that describes essentially the problem that your fellowship is designed to address. And that is probably one of the most strategic parts because, that's the first thing someone's going to read. You want to grab their attention. You want to make it seem very cutting edge, all that. And then you have the next part is showing a plan of what you're going to do for 2 years, I think broken up in 6-month intervals to address that problem. And it's a really excellent process. I think I refer back to mine all the time, and it made me have a very clear path of how to go into this 2-year space of creating something. It is very hard to plan out, though, what you're going to do for 2 years with just an idea, but it's a good exercise, I think. And I think the more detailed, the better, probably for that. I kind of broke up in different areas what my project would be doing. I think generally people do kind of a combination of direct representation and then like some kind of advocacy and maybe some kind of community building, community involvement, community advocacy work. If you break it up in buckets, you can tailor each 6-month part to having a step for each of those buckets, if that makes sense. And then there's a personal statement part where you explain, why you've come to where you are now and why you're interested in this and your experience and background, why this is important to you. And I think there's a section on how you plan to involve your sponsor, which I don't know if this is true, but I saw that as an opportunity to show the sponsor what they would get out of it. And that's a place to talk about pro bono work.
And just to be clear, because the terminology is used differently in different places, I was using the word funder earlier just to make it clear, but we call them sponsors internally and externally. So we're talking about the people who would actually be funding the project when we say sponsor. We're not talking about the host organization where you would be placed.
Yeah. And then there's a section at the end that I believe you fill out with your host organization, which is, a big part of it is showing that you're not just going to do the work of a regular staff attorney. You're there to fill this new role and how that's going to fit into the organization and how the organization is going to support you in doing that. Yep.
The only other thing I would add is the personal statement is really important because there's almost a scholarship-like feel to our fellowships that are awarded. You have an entity like Microsoft or Uber, or you have a big law firm that's actually choosing their Equal Justice Works fellow. A lot of times the personal statement and what brings you to this work is something that really tips people one way or the other. And so highly recommend that you create a narrative there, craft a narrative on why this is the work why this is what you want to do, not just for the next 2 years, but hopefully longer. Matt, do you have any tips for a strong application, or are there pieces of this that you'd like to highlight?
I think being willing to be flexible. So even for if it's an application that we haven't had a discussion with the person who's applied, who's sent in the application, even if it catches our eye, when we actually then engage with the applicant, the ultimate application that we would submit to EJW or to Skadden is probably going to look significantly modified compared to what they had originally been proposed. Part of that's just because I think we've also developed some expertise in knowing what the fellowships are looking for. Part of it's to make sure that it's fitting within what we are wanting to do. A big part of it is, as Adina mentioned, particularly for EJW, since there are a lot of benchmarks, 6-month benchmarks, I think we've developed a good understanding of what is likely to be able to be accomplished in each of those and what to what to be telling a fellowship that you're going to be able to do in that regard. I think that trying to make sure that one comes up with my understanding, one difference between, and perhaps Connor and Adina can, and Sterling too can speak to this, but one difference between what Skadden may be looking for and what EJW may be looking for is the direct services plus advocacy piece is more in line with what EJW is looking for and focusing more on the direct services and not necessarily the non-direct services or the advocacy piece may not be as much of what Skadden is looking for. Is that fair to?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for us, again, it comes down to what the sponsors are looking for, and a lot of times our sponsors may not be as well versed in direct legal services and may not. They're looking, at least on paper, for something that seems bigger, right? That's like an advocacy piece that you're going to take this direct service component. You're gonna be informed by this direct client work, and then you're going to use that to, try to pass a piece of legislation at the DC Council or something like that. So I would say that's fairly accurate. Question for all three of you: what makes a fellow different from a staff attorney, and why would you want to be a fellow or host a fellow?
I could start. So, a fellow, for one thing, they are going to be, at least at the Washington Lawyers Committee, they are going to be focused on, a specific area within one of our existing projects. And so right now our current EJW fellow who works in housing is not doing the whole panoply of housing discrimination work that we do. I mean, we do race discrimination, source of income discrimination cases, cases where inaccessible housing cases, but what Brooke Hill, our current EJW fellow, focuses on exclusively is on trying to use the civil rights laws to address the affordable housing crisis, for instance, and trying to make sure that redevelopments are taking that they're not discriminating against people on the basis of familial status by squeezing out large families that were already existing there, making sure that there's not the perpetuation of segregation when redevelopments are going on in the city. So it's a very sort of discrete subset of existing work that we may be doing or aren't doing much of or want to be doing more of. Within that, and this is sort of the challenge for the host organization as much as anybody, is trying to make sure though that within that you're getting exposed to all the various types of things though that a staff attorney might get exposed to. We want to make sure that you are developing. I mean, we're a litigation shop. We want to make sure that you're getting exposed to the various nuts and bolts of all those areas within what you're doing. So that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, but that's more on the host organization. But I think that the biggest difference between a fellow and a staff attorney is really their sort of laser focus on the project that they're doing as opposed to being an extra hand for us to lean on.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and just add from the perspective of the fellow, I think it's also having someone to bring new ideas, to be more entrepreneurial, sort of a fresh look at the way things are being done. And it can be challenging. I mean, getting organizations to change and grow is very difficult, and there's a lot of politics to that. So that's an interesting hat to wear as a new person right out of law school in a nonprofit that's under-resourced. But it's great. I mean, I think a lot of it is getting the other staff invested and seeing why it's important. And once that happens, like really great things can come out of that.
I will just echo all that and then say, I think that there's a little bit of additional autonomy that you get, and that's a nice piece to it. Additionally, you kind of have another network that's external to your organization, which is nice to bounce off ideas at Skadden. You have this sort of a bunch of Skaddens that are out in the world doing similar work, or former Skaddens that you can really create a network with them, and that's sort of a lifelong or a career-long benefit to being a fellow. And then additionally, I get one perk of Skadden, for example, is just being able to, they put aside a little bit of money that you can use to go to conferences and things like that. So if your organization isn't able to fund a young attorney to go to a conference in a different part of the country, then you can tap into that and you're able to access something you might not have been able to.
Awesome. So you're actually answering what my next question was going to be, which is what is the community like of your fellowship program once you're in the field? So I think you answered that. So thank you. But Adina, I don't know if you want to talk about what it's like to be an Equal Justice Works Fellow and kind of what are the other pieces once you're in the field.
Well, one great thing is the leadership and development training that's every year. It's really great. It's a couple days, and all the fellows come to DC and do different sort of like classes, trainings on different topics, and it's a great way to meet other people doing similar work. I've definitely made some contacts in that are working on similar issues, and some of the only people in the country working on them. So it's great to have that common bond.
Yeah, we work really hard to make that some really great programming, things that you're not necessarily going to learn in law school, but that you really need as a first or second year attorney at a public interest organization. So we have 300 fellows in the field currently, about 150 of which, or 130 of which are in this particular program that we're talking about. But we at Equal Justice Works actually run a compendium of different fellowship programs, some of which are funded completely differently, funded by big, large grants from the federal government. And happy to answer questions about that afterwards, since it's not our focus here today. But as a result, we just have so many new attorneys working all over the U.S. on a ton of different amazing issues. So it's really great to get them all in one space. So I'm sure people have a lot of questions about this particular subject of project-based fellowships and applying and what that looks like and all of that. I'm going to turn it over to Malik next, though. We're going to hear about government fellowships and the lovely, fun Usajobs, as we were talking about. And then we're going to do the questions after Malik speaks so that we can ask anyone on the panel. And then, as Connor said, I think a couple of people are more than willing to stick around afterwards and answer any questions individually. But we want to make sure that the program itself ends by 8:30. So with that, I'll turn it over to Malik.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Malik Walker. I'm a manager on the education and outreach team at the Partnership for Public Service. Has anyone ever heard of the Partnership for Public Service? Very good. All right. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that strives to make a more effective government for the American people. And we do that by helping the government to attract and retain mission-critical talent, developing strong leaders, and helping government to improve their systems and processes. So let's get into it. I typically focus on building that talent pipeline. So that's why I'm here to talk to you. We want you to serve in the federal government, or to at least to consider a career in the federal government. Why federal service? You can make a difference. A lot of people are attracted to the federal service because of the mission of each organization. It's the biggest stage where you can focus on public health issues, homelessness, and a range of issues ranging from the environment. Whatever your passion is, there's probably a place in it in the federal government. So we always talk about that. Also, it's a place where you can enjoy a work-life balance. That's one of the most attractive parts of the government. A lot of times when you go to a law firm, you're working really long hours. The work is it's important, obviously, but the federal government does allow a lot more flexibility. They allow more really good benefits as far as health benefits. Again, a lot of flexibility in your work life. And then another part of the government is there are opportunities all across the country. So, of course, the highest concentration is here in the Washington, D.C. area. How many of you are here interning in D.C. for just the summer? So where are you guys from? Just a few people. Where are you from? From where? Florida, okay. Pittsburgh. I guess someone from the back. Atlanta. And anyone else? Well, guess what? There are federal opportunities in every city that you named. Again, the largest concentration is right here in DC. However, you can take a look at the map here. You have another 10% that are out on the West Coast, a high percentage in the Mid-Atlantic and Philadelphia, Pittsburgh area. Any of the major cities in the country, they have what's called a federal executive board, and so that means there are a good concentration of federal agencies there. And every federal agency needs good attorneys. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about the actual opportunities in the federal government. How many of you are familiar with the Pathways programs? Anyone? So Pathways programs, there are 3 different programs that make up Pathways. You have their internship program, the Recent Graduates program, and the Presidential Management Fellows program. The internship program, it's pretty much what it sounds like. When you are a student in school, you are eligible for the internship program. It's actually at any level, so you have a few high school students, college students, but there are also opportunities for law students to serve as interns while you're in school. Then there's the Recent Graduates program. The Recent Graduates program is for students that have recently completed their degree within the past 2 years. And so what's really neat about the Recent Graduates program is the training and development opportunities. You get a mentor, and again, you get a lot of really good, rich opportunities as a recent grad. And it's recent, again, for those 2 years, up until 2 years after you graduate. So if any of your friends, they've already graduated, still looking for something different, they want an opportunity in the federal government, you can mention that. And also the Presidential Management Fellows program. That's the federal government's premier management development program. So it brings in a lot of younger talent or entry-level talent, but they are developing them to be the senior leaders across the federal government. So a lot of your undersecretaries in an agency, a lot of them may have started as a PMF or back in the day it was called the PMI program, but a lot of them came in through that way. Now the PMF program, it does have a very small window of time that you can actually apply for the program. The application window usually opens in the fall around November, and you have about 2 weeks to apply, and you do that in your last year of your program, so your last year of law school, or again, up to 2 years after you've completed your degree, you're still eligible. And here are a few programs that you all may be interested in. These are I just cherry picked a few to talk to you about. So take another look there. These are just literally just a few, but the Attorney General's Honors Program, their applications, their window for 2017 through 2018 will open July 31st, and it closes on September 5th. So you may want to consider that. Also the GAO opportunity there, and then FDIC, that window is open now, June 1st through September 30th. Again, just a very small sampling of some of the legal fellowship opportunities available to you right now. Now, how do you apply? This is the fun part because we get to talk about Usajobs, everyone's favorite website. I must admit, Usajobs is a little bit clunky. I worked at the Office of Personnel Management for about 7.5 years. And so OPM, they actually are responsible for Usajobs. And in that time, I still don't like it. It has improved quite a bit over the past few years. But I will say it is the premier place where you find opportunities to serve in the federal government. It doesn't have all opportunities. So the intelligence community, sometimes you go to those individual websites to find opportunities there. But for Usajobs, you will find most federal agencies are posting their job opportunities there. So you have to go to that website. And so just a few things, you can narrow your search based on your location. If you have a specific agency that you're interested in, you can do a very specific search. You can also do a save search. You can get the alerts. Like Delisa mentioned earlier, if you want to get one every day, you can. But you can also do those save searches right there on Usajobs. I will mention too, just a quick pro tip for Usajobs for you guys, if you're interested specifically in jobs in the legal field, They USA Jobs require, they have different series codes, and so 0900 is one that you'll probably find a lot of jobs that are really interesting to you. So it'll help you kind of trim down. You don't have to look through everything about every program analyst or program manager. You can go directly to that 0900 series and find some really good opportunities there. So write that down, and that's where you'll find a lot of those. Now, when you're looking at a job announcement, a few things you want to pay attention to. Take a look at that job overview very closely. The recent graduate opportunities are typically highlighted. Internship opportunities, they may have the word student in them, so that's a quick identifier. Again, for the PMF program, that's a separate application process. You actually go to pmf.gov to apply there, though they will likely place a posting on USA Jobs, but you actually apply on pmf.gov. And again, that's a 2-week period in November or sometime in the fall. Another quick pro tip for you all. The federal resume is very, very different than the private sector resume. And I always like to mention that because in the private sector, you're usually used to a very short resume. You just want to give quick highlights, bullets. It's the federal government. So, of course, it's very different. But the federal resume is typically one where I advise you throw in the kitchen sink. That's a place where you can list volunteer opportunities. You mentioned summer jobs, anything that you think may be relevant to the job that you're applying to. Make sure that you place keywords in your resume. But throw in the kitchen sink. Don't sell yourself short or your experiences short. There is no page limit. There's no brevity is not what they're looking for here. But no, truly, they want to see that you have a lot of the things. And so a lot of times people, especially students, a lot of students are knocked out of the process simply by not having a resume that really indicates all of their experience. And so you do that by, again, building a federal resume. USA Jobs actually will allow you to build a resume there, so you can do that also. And I wanted to keep it pretty brief for you, but here are a few resources for you. GoGovernment.org is one that I recommend because the partnership runs that one, but it will give you a lot of really good comparisons. It gives you a good visual comparison of the federal resume versus a private sector resume, so you can take a look there. But it also gives you a lot more of those pro tips regarding if you're looking specifically for a certain job series, you can see what it really means. And it lays out everything in plain language. So if there are certain things on USA Jobs where, you know what, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to you, check gogovernment.org. And then, of course, USA Jobs, you want to go there. And then the best places to work. Again, that's from the partnership. We do a ranking of the best places to work in the federal government based on surveys that federal employees take, their employee viewpoint survey. And so it will give you an idea of what federal employees are thinking, what they like about their agency, what they think could be improved, what they hate about their agency. It's all there. So as you're making your decision, you guys are really highly marketable. So you want to go to a place that meets your needs. So just take a look at that when you're looking. And I think we'll open it to questions for anyone on the panel.
Yeah. Questions for anyone, whether you want to talk about federal jobs or project-based fellowships. Yes.
So for UJW fellowships, because the window is so long, is there any benefit and looking for sponsors? So is there any benefit in applying early versus later, or is it just?
There is not a benefit for applying early. Yeah. Yes.
For internships, you are applicants expected to apply to different places. Are you also able to interview, like for staff, do you have to apply to different organizations for the interview, or are they going to do it via Skype or open?
Sure.
At least for Skadden, it's usually whatever cities that they've got a firm in, they'll do it in that city. So like they do it in, a couple different cities in California, DC office, New York office, Chicago office, and then whatever partner that's in that firm that's interested in interviewing will do it there.
Yep. And then for Equal Justice Works, it varies widely depending on who the sponsor is. So some of our sponsors are really dedicated to making sure that the candidates are in person, and in that case, they'll fund the candidates to actually come to them wherever they are. Other ones are totally fine with video conference, Skype, anything like that. We do have a couple who are totally fine with phone interviews. We at Equal Justice Works do not have the resources to be able to fly the 150 or 200, I think, candidates that probably end up interviewing with us out of the 450 that apply every year. And so it's really up to the funder. But a lot of times candidates do make the choice to come to an interview that is not in their city and to travel. But that we usually leave up to the candidate. Yes.
Depending on who funds you for equal justice work, is it the same amount of funding you get as a fellow, or does it depend on who you're?
Sure, that's a great question. So the way that our program works is that we provide we do not set the salary for your fellowship. Your salary is determined by the organization where you are going to work. That organization certifies to Equal Justice Works that they will pay you the same amount that they pay any incoming attorney with the same level of experience that you have. We provide to those organizations up to $50,000 to offset the cost of that salary. If there's a delta between that $50,000 and what the organization pays, so if they want to pay you more than $50,000, the organization is responsible for coming up with that delta. We do this for a number of reasons. The most important reason is to continue to give organizations the autonomy to pay their employees what they want to pay their employees. It's also because we're a national program. We're in a ton of different markets, so we can't prescribe a specific salary, especially if it's a lot higher than an organization makes maybe in rural Arkansas or something like that. So that piece is important to us. Oh, and it's also important, the other reason we do that is it's important to us for the organizations to have skin in the game. We want them to really feel invested in the projects. So, yes.
This question's for Mr. Walker. You mentioned that there is a difference between a resume from the federal government as opposed to a private entity. And I guess my question is, you mentioned on the website that there would be a way to build the resume on the website. Do they also provide like examples of what they qualify as good resumes as well on the website? Just like kind of use as like a cornerstone and the resume?
Usajobs may have an example. I know GoGovernment.org does have a good example of a federal resume versus a private sector resume. But Usajobs, they have the the resume builder. And so we'll give you basically a template of things that you should include. And so it'll show you what it should look like based on, you enter it yourself though.
And Delisa.
I just want to say that PSJD, we're actually working on that resource right now to have a comparison between a good federal resume and a bad resume. So look for that soon.
Both websites.
Love it. Yes.
I want to follow up on this question. Aside from preparing the federal resume, and if you're interested in the PMF, because it's only a 2-week window, what can you do to prepare so that way that 2-week window opens, you're not rushing, and you have the most polished process?
So the application process, it changes annually, but it's pretty much a set application. So making sure you have your materials together. So the website right now, it'll tell you exactly what you need to have. So just basic things, your transcript, official transcript, and then the application itself. I think they're still doing an online assessment. You won't be able to do that until that 2-week period. There are some resources. I don't think OPM provides it now, but you can find them out there that will kind of give you an example of what an online assessment may look like. So a lot of people use that to prepare for there. But generally, I would say keep an eye out on when that announcement is made. It typically happens in late October, early November. And then again, it's a very short window.
Sure. Yes.
Hello, my name is Tyson. This could be for anybody. How often do any of the fellows continue their project with any of the organizations? Do they stay? Do they get offers? Is it a common thing, or is it just after your 2 years, the time is up?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and I think it varies from organization to organization. We have a new executive director as of a year ago, and his philosophy is that that's where he actually really likes for us to pull for permanent staff positions from people who have been fellows, and that's, in his short time there, that's been our track record. The one EJW fellow who finished up her fellowship last August, September, is now a full-time staff attorney with us, and that's sort of our hope going forward, is that's where how we will fill our staff.
So I can give you the statistics on, at the end of 2 years of an Equal Justice Works fellowship, 2/3 of the fellows who are departing are staying at the organization that they were at for the 2 years. More importantly to us, though, that we're more excited about is the fact that 80% of the projects that they founded are continuing. So what that means is they've created something that continues even if they're not there, right? Like they created an intake system, they created something that's going to last beyond the fellowship, and that is something that we're definitely looking for when we are evaluating proposals.
I had a question to ask. Was there a particular GPA requirement for you guys when y'all are looking at the people that you want to pick from their law school career, or you guys just go based off their resume and maybe their references or whatever?
Yeah, there's no specific GPA requirement. We're not using any sort of litmus test on it. I mean, I think it's a factor that goes into the mix, but I know just from experience that we've had like very compelling applications that may not have had the most stellar GPA, but we found the applications as compelling enough for us to want to try to create a successful fellowship for that person.
Yeah, we don't ask for GPA or transcripts at Equal Justice Works. We're much more interested in what you've done in the 2 years.
I'll just add that Skadden will take your GPA into account. They'll ask for your GPA and take your transcript, but I don't think that should discourage anybody from applying. I think that it's very much one of many things that they'll take into consideration. It's just sort of part of the process, but certainly shouldn't be a discouragement.
Definitely. Yes.
Mr. Walker, when you are making your federal resume, how do you suggest mapping yourself around confidential information?
I'm sorry, around confidential information?
Yeah. If you aren't allowed to say certain things, how do you still describe what you did as well?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think it depends on where you're applying. Obviously, again, the federal government, they are a place where there are a lot of clearances, so they're used to sensitive information. There's a way that you can say it probably without mentioning a lot of those details. So where you can, obviously you want to share that. If you can't, obviously don't put it on the resume. But I'm sorry I can't be more specific with that, but I think it's probably on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
So for the fellowships, are there any specific focus areas of work that they're really attractive, or is it kind of broad?
So for Equal Justice Works, it's very broad. And every year we actually, part of our job is to go out and get those commitments to find the sponsors who want to fund the fellows. And so we ascertain ahead of time as much as possible where the areas, both issue areas and the geography that they're looking to fund in. And we publish that. We have we have a newsletter whose name is totally escaping me at the moment. But if you go to studentresourcecenter.org, you can sign up. I think JDs for Justice is the name of the newsletter. And every time we get new sponsor preferences, we publish that. It will also be on the landing page for applying for fellowships at any given time. And so you can know ahead of time kind of what people are looking for. You can also look, and the same goes for the Skadden website. Both of our websites have really extensive listings of current and former fellows. So you can get a great sense of what is normally funded by seeing what has been funded before. So I highly encourage you to look at both fellowship websites, do some digging, Ours even has like a directory, both of them have like a search feature, like a directory feature. You can try to find former fellows who maybe went to your law school or who are working in the city that you want to work in, that sort of thing.
Can I just
Yeah,
add to
please.
that? That resource is so helpful. I just want to underscore, when I was applying, I went through and I think I probably printed the page of every fellow who had ever done immigration work and read through them. And you
That's
see
a
a lot
lot.
of common themes that are repeatedly funded. So that's a really good strategy, I think.
Yes.
So do you have to be a U.S. citizen or like a permanent resident to apply for this college?
At Equal Justice Works, you have to certify that you can work for the 2 years. There's no qualification for citizenship or anything like that. So if you're not an LPR or a citizen, I think we have a box that says, like, here's how I'm certifying that I can be legally in the country for the 2 years. And someone, whether that's someone will sponsor me, this organization, whatever that is. Yeah.
I was going to say, most federal positions do require that you are a U.S. citizen. It will specifically state it when you look at a job posting.
And do you know what Skadden's policy is?
I don't know what Skadden's policy is. I presume it's something similar that you authorize some sort of work authorization certification, but I don't know the answer to that.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Sure.
There's students who have DACA or TPS,
Yep.
and that's 18 months. So that's not the full 2 years. So can they certify that they're going to present the second renewal?
I assume as such because we have a number of fellows under DACA that are current DACA recipients. But I don't know for sure. So I don't want to, yes, like in practice that has happened. Fellowships at equaljusticeworks.org is a fantastic email address to ask any like nitty gritty questions like that too.
And, like if you're interested in Skadden, I'm happy to touch base with you about that afterwards. Also, depending on your comfort level of when I talked about making that call to Susan earlier, that's a potential opportunity to ask those questions. I had an awkward question to ask her. I was changing my name at the same time I was applying, and so when I called her, I said, what do I do about this situation? So she was pretty comfortable to respond to that. So that's also an opportunity to ask that question if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, I'm happy to, run interference. Yep.
Yes.
In terms of like project ideas, is it always the case that an idea or a project is in an underdeveloped area of the law or something novel? Is that not the case?
I would say the answer is it needs to just be something that hasn't happened before. It could be totally an area of the law that is already developed and there's a ton of people doing this work, but maybe you're bringing it to a new neighborhood or a new population. Maybe, so it doesn't have to be that there's a new statute and we need to litigate under it for the first time because it's never been litigated. A lot of very successful fellowships are about geography and bringing something new to a population that hasn't had it before. I think Adina had a really good something that she mentioned when she was formulating her idea where she was talking about what were the gaps. So that's really, when you're thinking about your project, it's like what exists out there in the legal services landscape and who's already being served, and then think about like who isn't and what can I do to find those people.
That's right.
Anything you'd like to add, any of you?
I would say Skadden is similar. You want to find similarly the gaps. They're probably slightly less focused on sort of like an innovative project and a little more on making sure that you can pitch how your project addresses like alleviating the effects of poverty. And so that's sort of more of the angle that I think that they're looking for.
Yes.
I was just going to also add to that question. So many folks find these fellowships from a project that they created, and then something they were like very passionate about school or really getting a total on school and whatnot. Can you speak to someone who might not have any sense of what exactly what your project might be? Because I would imagine for a lot of folks, it's a very daunting process to come up with this project and to even draft the proposal and all the details that are required. So can you speak to a little bit to someone who may not have an idea at all or may know, let's say they are very interested in immigration, but within that,
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would encourage that person to contact us ahead of time and say, and even if we aren't ultimately the organization that's going to be the good host match, I think that if it's something that's within like an area that we do, or if there was another area that you're looking for, you find organizations that are doing something in that area, and you have the equivalent of almost like an informational interview with them about what are the types of where are the underserved communities or the unaddressed issues, and that I might focus a project on.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of organizations, like he was just saying, know what they need and just need someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and do it.
Right.
Yeah, I would look at PSJD, look at all those listings, right? If you don't know what you want to do, see if you can find some sponsored listings, is what they're calling it on there, meaning like, the organizations who know what they want and they know what area they want to bring, and maybe that will spark something for you. So unfortunately, we are out of time. I don't know if anyone, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit if anyone has individualized questions.
I'm happy to as well.
Yeah, it sounds like some of our panelists are as well. So I just want to say thank you so much, not only for you being here, big thank you to the panelists. Really awesome. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Awesome stuff. You guys are doing such great work there.
Nice to meet you.